So I think a lot of students waited until the last minute last night to turn in essays because I think they selfishly wanted to enjoy their weekend. Do you blame them? No. I mean, how many times do we get a 3-day or 4-day weekend, right? So our essay today is going to talk about selfishness. And boy, that's something we can all relate to. Yes, we all have a little bit of selfishness. So if you look at the definition for selfish, and I've kind of included that, it's lacking consideration for others, chiefly concerned with one's own personal profit or pleasure. So some examples of selfish behavior, cutting in line, right? Not sharing. I think you know how that goes with sister, right? Siblings know how that goes. On a business level, we're seeing a lot of selfishness with rising prices. Is it about raising prices because it's necessary or raising prices because they want to make money? So, a lot of it's because they want to make money. Is it necessary to maintain those high prices? No. So some synonyms for selfish: you're egotistical. Ego means you're thinking of yourself, self-centered, self-serving. Do you happen to like people who are selfish? It's not a very attractive quality, is it? Do you think people call you out when you're selfish, Biomini? Yeah, they let you know. Do mom and dad let you know? Sister? Friends? Okay, so obviously the opposite of that is selfless. So concerned more with the needs and wishes of others than with one's own wishes. Not very many people fall into this category. You can think of occupations that are selfless: doctors, your firemen, your policemen. Their job is to serve, military. So they have to be selfless by definition. But someone who is selfless is more considerate. Instead of cutting in line, which is what a selfish person would do, a selfless person might give you the spot in line. For example, if there's a person in line who's obviously in a hurry, maybe elderly, I'm like, go ahead, just go ahead in front of me. I see a lot of selfless behavior on the highway. When you let somebody in who's got their blinker on, it's considerate to let them in. So someone who's selfless is altruistic. And altruistic means someone who gives, like a philanthropist, like the Gates. Bill and Melinda Gates are philanthropists. They give their millions to charity. Considerate, generous, noble, kind. Do we like to be around selfless people? And I think today that's getting harder and harder to come by, isn't it? Okay, so we're going to read a story called The Selfish Giant. So I'm actually going to, if you don't mind, record this. I'm going to read it and record it. Here we go. The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. Every afternoon, as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. How happy we are here, they cried to each other. One day the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend, the Cornish ogre, and had stayed with him for 7 years. After the 7 years were over, he had said all day that he had said all that he had to say, for his conversation was limited, and he determined to return to his own castle. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant. "Anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself." So he built a high wall all around it and put up a notice board: "Trespassers will be prosecuted." He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had now nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander around the high wall where their lessons were over and talk about the beautiful garden inside. "How happy we were there," they said to each other. Then the spring came, and all over the country There were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant, it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, but then saw the notice board. It was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. "Spring has forgotten this garden," they cried, "so we will live here all year round." The snow covered up the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared all day about the garden and blew the chimney pots down. "This is a delightful spot," he said. "We must ask the hail on a visit." So the hail came. Every day for 3 hours he rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates, and then he ran round and round the garden as fast as he could. He was dressed in gray, and his breath was like ice. "I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming," said the selfish giant, as he sat at the window and looked out at his cold white garden. "I hope there will be a change in the weather." But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. "He is too selfish," she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. It was really only a little linnet singing outside his window, but it was so long since he'd heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. "I believe the spring has come at last," said the giant, and he jumped out of bed and looked out. What did he see? He saw a most wondrous sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see, there was a little child, and the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they had covered themselves with blossoms and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about, twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene, only in one corner it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all around it, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could, but the boy was too tiny. And the giant's heart melted as he looked out. "How selfish I've been," he said. "Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will put that poor little boy up on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever." He was really very sorry for what he had done. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him, took him gently in his hand, and put him up into the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his 2 arms and flung them around the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back, and with them came the spring. "It is your garden now, little children," said the giant, and he took a great axe and knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. All day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him goodbye. "But where is your little companion?" he said, "the boy I put into the tree." The giant loved him the best because he had kissed him. We don't know, answered the children. He has gone away. You must tell him to be sure and come here tomorrow, said the giant. But the children said they did not know where he lived and had never seen him before. And the giant felt very sad. Every afternoon, when school was over, the children came and played with the giant. But the little boy whom the giant loved was never seen again. The giant was very kind to all the children, yet he longed for his first little friend and often spoke of him. How I would like to see him, he said. Years went over, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He could not play about anymore, so he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children at their games and admired his garden. I have many beautiful flowers, he said, but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all. One winter morning, he looked out of his window as he was dressing. He did not hate the winter now, for he knew that it was merely the spring asleep and that the flowers were resting. Suddenly he rubbed his eyes in wonder and looked and looked. It certainly was a marvelous sight. In the farthest corner of the garden was a tree covered with lovely white blossoms. Its branches were all golden, and silver fruit hung down from them, and underneath it stood the little boy he had loved. Downstairs ran the giant in great joy and out into the garden. He hastened across the grass and came near to the child. And when he came close, his face grew red with anger, and he said, Who hath dared to wound thee? For on the palms of the child's hands were the prints of 2 nails, and the prints of 2 nails were on the little feet. Who hath dared to wound thee? Cried the giant. Tell me, that I may take my big sword and slay him. Nay, answered the child, but these are the wounds of love. Who art thou? Said the giant, and a strange awe fell on him, and he knelt before the little child. And the child smiled on the giant and said to him, You let me play once in your garden. Today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise. And when the children ran in that afternoon, they found the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossoms. It sounds like a sad story, right? Do you think that the giant died happy? Do you think the giant was rewarded for his selflessness?
Yeah.
You think, what do you think was the difference? Why do you think he changed?
Because he changed because he saw that the kids were happy in his garden.
Was he punished?
Yeah,
How was he punished?
by having snow in his garden, and it'd be only winter in his garden, but then everywhere else it'd be spring.
Do you think he recognized that?
Yeah.
Had to. How did you like constant winter? Right? I mean, there's a reason we have seasons, right? Just when you get sick of one, right? Like just when we're kind of tired of winter. I mean, I don't mind winter. I don't mind that, I like snow. I think snow can be fun. I just don't want it 24/7, right? So there's a reason that we have seasons. Okay, so let's look at our story elements. We're going to go to page 5. We have the giant, a special boy, and we'll talk about him in a minute, and the children. Okay, so we have a span of time here that's quite long, really. At the beginning of the story, the giant's gone 7 years visiting an ogre. So in all that 7-year span, these children have played, without supervision, without even knowing, right, that they were encroaching on his castle. And then he returns and he's angry, yells at the children, builds a wall. Okay, so wow. It's not enough to say, stay out of my garden, but builds a giant wall, right? And if you think about that, Viomini, didn't he kind of wall himself in too? Didn't he kind of create his own jail, if you think about it, right? Yes, he kept the children out, but he was alone. So at some point, even though I was kind of like, you're selfish and you're mean and you deserve what you get, it had to take a toll on him, the loneliness. And you and I know that because of the pandemic. I think we can relate a little bit more to that feeling of isolation and being alone. And I think, because the winter, because the hail and the frost and the snow, and because it was harsh, I think that taught him a lesson, don't you? And maybe that kind of opened up his heart to be more willing to be accepting. So the climax of the story is just this refusing to share his winter. And then the entire falling action is when he hears signs of spring. And it's because the children have found a way in to that garden. And the story was pretty clear. There was nowhere else for them to play, right? I kind of pictured New York City with nothing. Like if you've ever been to New York City, it's buildings and asphalt and very little green. And only when you go to Central Park where you're like, okay, this is normal. This is nice. This is nature. So when the giant comes out, at first they're afraid because he's been so mean. And then the little boy becomes instrumental in the story. And the little boy is really the person that changes his heart, right? He feels compassion for this little boy and helps him into the tree. And then, only then, does he invite the children back in, right? And then the little boy doesn't return for a long, long time until the end of his life. But the message here is what happens when we choose to share, when we choose to be kind, we choose compassion, it is rewarded, right? So there is a Christian symbolism to the end of this story, and I'm just going to tell you it. I am a Christian, so I just spent the whole weekend with what the message of this story is. And this is really interesting because Oscar Wilde is a very famous American author. And it's really interesting. This kind of shows how many people are, believe in certain beliefs. But the little boy was a god, in case you missed that. He was the top, and he was testing him to see, have you changed your heart? Have you changed your ways? And I think whatever you believe, if you believe in one God or many gods, the gods reward you, don't they? When you honor them, when you do the right thing, you are rewarded. And that's really kind of the message of the story. So in the Christian faith, what the giant earned was heaven. He earned everlasting life in heaven. He earned, the prize, if you will. And the message here also is it's never too late to change your ways. It's never too late. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to be selfish. When we recognize that and we open our hearts and become more selfless, then perhaps we are rewarded. Does that make sense? So go to your guided questions for a second. Just a couple here. Why are the children used to playing in the giant's garden? D, the garden was located on the way home from their school. C, the giant had been visiting a friend for 7 years and was never home to stop the children from coming into his garden. B, the children were given permission to play in the garden while the giant was away. And A, the garden was a public area where the children were allowed to play.
I think it's C.
You think right. And if you question it, go back in the story and look, right? Don't ever hesitate to do that. The author of the story uses figurative language. Boy, did we have a lot of figurative language to paint a colorful picture of events. Which use of figurative language showed personification? Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, but when it saw the notice board, it was so sorry for the children, it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. And trees were so glad to have the children back that they covered themselves with blossoms and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. All of the above.
I think it's probably D.
It is all of the above. Why was the giant being punished? A, he left to go visit his friend, the Cornish ogre, for 7 years, and he failed to tend his garden. B, he spoke angrily to the children, asking them, "What are you doing here?" C, the giant spoke the words, "My own garden is my own garden." D, The giant built a high wall around his garden, posting a sign, "Trespassers will be prosecuted," to keep out the children. What's the best answer?
D.
Correct. How was the giant punished? Everywhere else around the giant's garden enjoyed spring, but it was always winter in his garden. The birds refused to sing because there were no children playing in the garden. The beautiful flowers refused to come out, and the trees would not blossom. D, all of the above.
All of the above.
Correct. How did the children find their way back into the garden? D, the giant invited the children back in. C, the little boy who kissed the giant gave the children hope and allowed them to find the hole in the wall. B, the children found a hole in the wall and found a way into the giant's garden. A, they climbed a tree which lifted them up over the wall. Ooh,
B.
it is B. Last one. Why did the giant change his mind and allow the children back into his garden? A, he was lonely and missed the happy noises of the children. B, he learned his lesson when spring never came. C, he was tired of being punished by winter and knew if he let the children come back to the garden, spring would return. D, the giant opened up his heart and discovered when he was selfless, he was happier. Some of them are true, but what is the best answer?
Probably D.
Correct. Okay, so far so good, right? Okay, let me grab the. All right, so here's our prompt. You ready? In the story, The Selfish Giant, the author Oscar Wilde shows how a giant transforms from an angry, egotistical antagonistic character into a kind and public-serving protagonist. Public-serving means you share it with the public. Okay, so here is your prompt. Explain how pivotal moments in the story allowed the giant to have a change of heart where he became more compassionate and selfless. This response should be given in third person. It did not ask for an opinion. So here are some ideas for good topic sentences. In the story, The Selfish Giant, author Oscar Wilde shows the giant being punished for his self-centeredness, and only then does he have a change of heart. Author Oscar Wilde wrote the story, The Selfish Giant, to show how even an angry giant can learn from his mistakes and find a way to open his heart to change. Really, it's really fascinating. I am a woman of faith. I'm very religious, very spiritual person, and it is about your heart. You get to choose. We all have a choice how we respond. We can respond with love and compassion, or we can respond with hate and anger. And it is a choice. And I don't think anyone's happy, right? As kind of the story showed, especially not the giant, when we are angry and selfish. So make a claim, done in the topic sentence, back up the claim by giving 3 reasons, give textual evidence. So I did not get a chance to look to see, did you feel more comfortable giving a summary of the story, or did you feel more comfortable quoting the text?
I feel comfortable with both.
Okay, and I think it might need a combination of both, because the reason they want you to show the text is to show that you understand what the story means. So if you don't give enough, and you really do kind of have to explain that you understand the meaning of the story. So go to the outline that's a little bit more filled out. So first of all, here's an idea of what you could do at the beginning of the story. When the giant builds a high wall to keep the children out of his garden, he's punished. You could draw your own conclusions here, Viomini. He is lonely, he is isolated, and boy, he's angered Mother Nature, hasn't he? I mean, spring is not a coming. And that has to be really gray and dark and dismal. That has to weigh on him. Yes? And no, the story never said that. But there has to be a reason that he changed the way he thought. So that's what you could do here. Second of all, when the giant notices the children have found their way into his garden and are playing in the trees, he welcomes them. This is a big change of heart. This is huge, right? And I think that is a sign that he was lonely. It is a sign that, he wasn't happy. Because he noticed the happy changes. When the giant, this is third, assists the crying little boy and is rewarded for his kindness, this is when everything changes for the giant. I mean, he had an encounter with a god. He had an encounter with someone, and he was rewarded. Spring came back. When the giant loses the beauty of his garden and spring refuses to come, he becomes lonely, filled with despair. But this allows him to see the error of his ways and open his heart to welcome the children back into his garden. Okay, note here, you do not have to pick the same events listed above. Okay, should always pick the moments in the story that impact you the most, right? That you can back up and claim. So to add a lead and a conclusion, and I'm not asking you to do this, I'm just showing you how to do this. Anyone can relate to not wanting to share something precious or valued. In the short story, The Selfish Giant, the giant has been gone for 7 years, and while he was away, his beautiful garden became the playground for children. When the giant returns to see children laughing and playing, he becomes angry, telling them to stay out of his garden. The giant probably wanted to enjoy the beauty of the garden and keep it all to himself. He even builds a high wall to keep out the trespassing children. Okay, conclusion idea. The giant's plan worked, as the high wall kept the children out. However, this selfish behavior caused him to be punished. Winter continued to relentlessly stick around, never allowing spring to arrive, only caused more storms and damaging weather. The giant must have recognized his situation became worse, and he was lonelier and more unhappy than before. Perhaps the joyful laughter of the children and hints of spring warmed the giant's heart. The pivotal point in the story is when the giant assists the crying boy into the tree, as his show of compassion showed the children he had changed. Okay, so did I, in the lead and the conclusion and throughout, explain the message of the story?
Yes.
So don't forget to do that. They want to know, not only do you understand the message, but how it was clear in the story that this was the message. And that's your job. Make a claim, back it up with 3 reasons, and support it with text from the story. You don't have to add a lead and conclusion, and I'm not even sure, teachers aren't even sure the level or the time frame you have. I would tell you, Viamini, put your money and your time and effort into your claim and your 3 reasons and your 3 textual references. That's what they asked you for. They didn't ask you for a lead and a conclusion, did they? Okay, I'm just showing you how you could connect it all together. Got it? Any questions?
No.
Do you like the story?
Yeah. And also, Miss Hensel, so but this Saturday is the same essay we're doing today?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if you want to come to class, wait till the following Saturday. But you can stay online. Viamini, you're doing great. You're turning in work. I cannot complain. Your work is solid. If you were slipping, I would make you come in, but you're not.
Okay.
So I'm totally fine keeping it this way because you're such a conscientious student. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
You.
Take care, sweetie. Have a good one.
Bye.